The wind came down off the frostfangs with a patient cruelty, as if it had all the time in the world to learn the shape of every man's weakness. It worried at the shadow tower until the stones themselves seemed to shiver, and it scoured the top of the wall so clean that Daenerys Mallister could taste ice on his tongue with every breath. He kept his hands tucked beneath his sable cloak, fingers curled around nothing, because steel went brittle in weather like this, and pride went brittle faster. The wall beneath his boots was ancient and stubborn, a thing that had outlived kings and oaths and the names men made for themselves. He'd always trusted it in the way a sailor trusted the sea, not because it was kind, but because it was there. Tonight, it felt different. Tonight, the cold had a shape. Beyond the wall, the world was a smear of white and black, snow and pine and rock, the haunted forest disappearing into curtains of storm. The torches along the wall-walk burned low and angry, their flames pulled sideways by the wind. The men beside him, boys some of them, and old men with shoulders knotted by decades of hauling rope and hewing ice, stood with their spears braced and their eyes narrowed, trying to see what the storm refused to show. The horn sounded once from below. A single blast meant little. A ranger returning. A signal to open the gate and curse the cold, and pretend the world was still arranged the way it ought to be. Daenerys didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the blot of darkness where the bridge of skulls arched over a chasm, a narrow spine of old timber and bones lashed together with rope. Wildlings had crossed it in summers past, barefoot and laughing, and he'd taken their arrows in the autumns that followed. He knew that bridge, knew the way snow gathered in its joints, knew how the wind sang through the gaps. A second blast came, then another, and this time the sound wasn't clean. It wavered. It stuttered, as if the man blowing it had forgotten how his own lungs worked. Daenerys stepped forward, boots crunching on rime. "Bring him up," he called down, and his voice came out sharper than he intended, like steel striking stone. The gate below clanged. Men shouted. Then the horn sounded again, the long notes slicing through the wind like a knife drawn slow. 3 blasts. The old signal? The one no man was meant to hear and live with. For a heartbeat, the wall seemed to hold its breath with them. Daenerys felt the hairs on his arms lift beneath his wool. He watched his men shift, saw fear leak into their posture the way cold leaked into bones. Someone behind him muttered a prayer to gods Daenerys had never seen answer any man's plea. The ranger appeared out of the storm like a mistake. Black cloak torn, hood gone, hair stiff with ice, eyes too bright and a face gone pale. He climbed the last ladder rung by rung, not with the steady exhaustion of a man who'd marched, but with the clumsy urgency of someone trying to outrun his own death. When he reached the wall walk, 2 brothers grabbed him by the arms. Daenerys took a step closer and saw the blood on the man's cheek wasn't fresh. It had frozen in jagged ridges, dark against skin that had gone gray. "What did you see?" Daenerys asked. The ranger tried to speak, and only a sound came out, a rasp like a saw through wet wood. He swallowed, jaw trembling. They're moving," he managed, and his breath smoked thick. "Not wildlings. Not men." Daenerys held the ranger's gaze. "How many?" The ranger's eyes flicked past Daenerys, past the torches, to the darkness beyond the wall. "Enough," he whispered, and there was something in that single word that made Daenerys' stomach tighten. The woods are full of them, I saw." His teeth chattered so hard Daenerys thought they might break. One of the brothers tried to pull him toward the stair. "Wait, Dor." Daenerys caught the ranger by the collar and leaned in. "Did you see the riders?" The ranger's eyes widened at the word, as if Daenerys had named a thing that should have stayed unnamed. He nodded once, jerking. "White," he said. Like moonlight on bone. They didn't walk. A low sound rolled through the storm, far beyond the bridge, too deep for thunder and too steady for wind. Daenerys felt it in the soles of his boots, a vibration that traveled up his bones. The torches guttered all at once, flames shrinking, going blue at their hearts for a blink before catching again. The men on the wall went quiet. Not the hush of discipline, the hush of prey. Denny straightened, and in the whiteness beyond the tree line he thought he saw a line of darkness moving against the snow. Not fast, not slow. Inevitable, like the tide. For a breath it was only his imagination, the storm playing tricks. Then something else answered from the north. A sound like a horn, but not of brass. Not of human breath. It came across the ice like grief-made music, and the wall beneath Denny's boots gave a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, as if it had heard its own name spoken by an enemy. At Castle Black, the day had the washed-out color of old pewter. Snow fell in steady patience, not a blizzard. Just the quiet accumulation that made the world look clean while it buried it alive. Jon Snow's sword was slick with meltwater in his own sweat. He'd been at the yard since dawn because the cold didn't hurt as much when he moved, and because there were too many thoughts in his head that sharpened in stillness. The recruits were spread across the packed ground, clumsy lines of black cloaks and borrowed blades. Gren's face was red with effort. Pip laughed too loudly every time he stumbled, as if noise could scare away the truth of his own fear. Samwell stood apart, shoulders hunched, hands white-knuckled around a practice sword that looked too heavy for him. He flinched every time steel rang on steel, every time someone shouted. Jon stepped away from his sparring partner and moved closer to Sam, lowering his voice. "If you hold it like that, you'll drop it." Sam's eyes darted to him, then away. "I'm trying," he said, as if the words tasted sour. "You're trying to die," Jon muttered. And when Sam bristled, Jon softened it with a sigh. "Bend your knees. Keep your weight, like that. And don't look at the blade. Look at the man." Sam tried. His stance wobbled like a newborn foal's. Across the yard, Elizer's voice cracked like a whip, biting into boys for sins as small as blinking. Jon looked up at the steps where the Lord Commander watched. Jeor Mormont stood with his hands behind his back, thick in a bearskin cloak that made him look like a carved thing from some older age. His face was weathered and stern, but his eyes were alive, tracking every movement in the yard, measuring. Ghost paced at the edge of the snow, white fur almost glowing against the gloom. The dire wolf's ears pricked toward the north, toward the wall. He'd been restless since before dawn, shifting and circling, as if the air itself carried a scent Jon couldn't name. A raven burst from the rookery tower, black wings flaring, and swooped down into the yard. It landed hard on a man's glove and pecked impatiently, head jerking as if furious at being made a messenger. Jon's breath caught. Ravens meant news, and news rarely meant anything good for the watch. The man with the bird pushed through the recruits and climbed the steps to Jeor, murmuring. Jon saw the Lord Commander's jaw tighten, the small movement of a man swallowing something bitter. Jeor raised a hand and the yard stilled. Even Eliezer paused, his mouth half open, offended by the interruption. "Fetch Maester Aemon," Jeor said, voice carrying without effort. "And send for Bowen Marsh, now." Eliezer took a step forward as if to argue, but Jeor's gaze slid to him, flat and cold as the ice beyond the wall. Eliezer's lips pressed thin. He didn't like being reminded that there were ranks above his hatred. Jeor opened the raven's message himself, fingers careful, as though the parchment might bite. Jon could see the ink, dark and hurried, and he felt his chest tighten with a sudden, irrational dread. Sam edged closer, eyes wide. Is it from your brother?" he whispered. Jon didn't answer, because the thought of Robb, of Winterfell, of the warmth of stone walls, and the smell of hearth smoke hurt more than the cold ever had. Jeor read. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hiss of falling snow. Then the Lord Commander looked up, and his eyes found Jon across the yard. "Snow," he said, and Jon's stomach dropped at the weight in his tone. "To my solar. You too, Tarly." Sam made a strangled noise of surprise. Jon sheathed his practice sword and crossed the yard, boots crunching. Ghost fell in beside him, silent as a shadow. As Jon climbed the steps, he caught Elizer's glare like a thrown knife. Eliezer hated him for the name he carried, and the blood he didn't have, for the attention he'd earned without meaning to. But there was something else in Eliezer's face now, something Jon had never seen there before. The flicker of a man hearing a door creak open in the dark. In the solar, the fire burned low. Maester Aemon sat near it, wrapped in gray wool, blind eyes turned toward the sound of the door. His face was lined like old parchment, but his hands were steady as he reached for the letter Jor held out. "Read," Jor said. Aemon's fingers traced the ink as if he could feel the words. "From the Shadow Tower," he murmured, voice dry as leaves. "Daenerys is not given to indulgence." Jor's mouth tightened. "No." Aemon's brows drew together. "3 blasts," he said softly, as if saying it louder might make it real. He says the cold is unnatural." Jon felt Ghost press closer against his leg, a solid warmth. "What does he mean?" Jon asked, though he already knew, and that was the worst part. Jor looked at him. "I mean," he said, "that the tales you were raised on may not be tales." Sam's breath came quick. "The others," he whispered, almost reverent with terror. Jor didn't correct him. Outside, somewhere along the wall, a horn sounded, once distant, uncertain. Jon's skin prickled. Jor's gaze snapped toward the window. "Sound the alarm," he barked, and the solar suddenly felt too small, too warm, like the last safe room in a burning house. At the Shadow Tower, the storm thickened, the snow turning from a steady fall to a furious, blinding wall. The world narrowed to torchlight and breath, and the creak of leather under stiffening fingers. Daenerys forced himself to breathe slow. Panic made men stupid. Stupidity killed more surely than any spear. He drove his men to the parapet, to the arrow slits, to the gatehouse where oil was kept for boiling. The Watch had rules for wildlings. They had rules for raiders and climbers and the desperate. They did not have rules for a darkness that walked in the open. "Keep the torches lit," Daenerys ordered, and watched as his brothers nodded too fast. If you see the pale ones, you do not run. You shout, you light the signal fires, you keep your feet under you." Somewhere below, the ranger who'd come in shaking was being hauled toward warmth, toward the maester's thin comfort. Daenerys wanted to believe that was enough. That a fire and a cup of wine could chase this terror out like any other. But the tremor he'd felt in the wall still hummed in his bones, like a bell that refused to stop ringing. On the wall walk, men clustered around the signal horn, looking at it as though it might bite. It was old brass, tarnished and pitted by years of use. Daenerys had blown it for wildlings, for lost rangers, for storms so bad men couldn't find the gate. He'd never thought he'd hear its third call and still have a tongue to taste the air. Below the wall, the haunted forest writhed. Daenerys stared into the trees until his eyes watered and shapes began to form from the chaos. Movement where there should have been stillness, shadows that didn't belong to branches. A torch flared on the far side of the bridge. Then another and another, flickering like fireflies. "Wildlings," someone whispered. Daenerys lifted a hand for silence. The torches weren't moving like men moved. They didn't bob. They didn't shift with footsteps. They came forward in a smooth, eerie glide, and as they drew closer, Daenerys realized it wasn't torchlight at all. It was eyes. Blue, cold, steady. A pale gleam between the trees. Dozens of them, hundreds, emerging from the storm as if the snow itself had grown watching faces. A man beside Daenerys made a sound like a sob swallowed back. Daenerys felt his own throat tighten. He wanted to call it trickery, reflection, a madness the cold conjured. But the air tasted different now, metallic and sharp, and his breath came out in thick plumes that fell heavy, as if the cold was growing denser with every heartbeat. "Loose," Daenerys ordered quietly. Arrows flew from the wall in a black swarm, vanishing into the white. He heard the faint thuds of impact, the sharp crack of wood and bone. For a moment, hope sparked. Then the figures came into the torchlight at the base of the wall. They were men and not men. Bodies in tattered furs, faces gnawed by frostbite, eyes dead and hungry. Some wore the remnants of wildling leathers. Some wore black. Denys felt his mouth go dry. "Gah," he breathed, and he hadn't prayed in years. A Wight lifted its face toward the wall as if it could smell the living above. It opened its mouth, and a sound came out that wasn't a scream, wasn't a roar, just a long, empty exhale, like winter's sighing. Then behind them, deeper in the trees, something pale shifted. The snow swirled around it and refused to touch it, as if afraid. Denys leaned forward, squinting. A rider. Not a horse, not truly, but something with 4 legs moving like a shadow. The rider's armor gleamed faintly, not with metal shine, but with the dull translucence of ice. Its head turned, slow, deliberate. Denys felt that gaze hit the wall like a hammer. The rider raised one hand. The Wights at the base of the wall stopped, not like men obeying a command, but like puppets held still by a tightened string. The air went quieter, the storm muffled, as if the world leaned in. And then the sound came again, deep, mournful, impossible. That horn-like call from far beyond the tree line. It rolled toward the wall, vibrating in Denys' teeth, shaking the ice beneath his feet. The wall answered with a faint crack. Denys froze. Ice did not crack. Not like that. Not with purpose. The fissure appeared 10 paces from him, a thin black line running down the wall's face. It widened, slowly at first, then faster, spidering outward like a wound opening. "Light the fires," Denys shouted, voice raw. "No!" Men scrambled. Torches flared. Oil splashed. Flames licked at ice, hissing. Down below, the Wights began to move again, but not toward the gate. Toward the crack. Toward the place where the wall was beginning to fail, as if they'd known it would happen before Denys had. Denys stared at that widening line and felt, for the first time in his life, the wall's age. Not its strength, its weariness. This was not an attack. This was a sentence being carried out. In the Lord Commander's solar, the air smelled of smoke and old paper. Aemon's fingers rested on the table as if he could feel the tremor in the world through the wood. Bowen Marsh arrived breathless, cheeks red from the cold and exertion, clutching more parchment as if it were armor. Eliezer strode in behind him without waiting to be invited, his disdain dragging across the floor like a cloak. He took one look at Jon and Sam and bared his teeth. "So," Eliezer said, voice thick with mockery, "the stewards are privy to command decisions now. Truly, we've become a generous order." "Many." Jor's gaze didn't move. "We've become an order that needs every man who can listen," he said. "Sit down, Thorn." Eliezer's nostrils flared. He didn't sit. Bowen did, lowering his papers onto the table as if afraid they might burn. "Ravens from Eastwatch," Bowen said. "Cotter reports wildling movement along the shore. More than usual. And now this from the Shadow Tower?" Jor cut him off. "Denys sees the dead walking." Eliezer let out a harsh laugh. "And I saw a pig fly once, Lord Commander. The cold makes men see things. It makes them die," Aemon said softly. And Eliezer's laughter died on his tongue. Jor leaned over the table, palms flat. "Denys blew 3 blasts. He does not do that lightly." Eliezer's jaw worked. For a moment Jon thought the man might actually admit doubt, but Eliezer's pride was a wall of its own. "The Shadow Tower is undermanned," he snapped. "Wildlings have learned to make horrors. Where corpses paint their eyes. We've seen their tricks." Sam's voice came out thin. The stories," he said, then swallowed. "The others." Eliezer rounded on him. "You," he spat, as if the word itself was an insult. "You should be cleaning chamber pots, not speaking." Jor raised a hand and Eliezer fell silent, vibrating with contained rage. Aemon turned his blind eyes toward Jon. "You faced a Wight," he said, as if tasting the memory. "Last year, in the yard." Jon's throat tightened. He could still see it, the dead man's pale face, the stink of rot, the way it had tried to climb. It burned. Jon said. "Fire stopped it." "Fire stops many things," Aemon murmured. "Not all." Bowen's fingers fidgeted with the edge of a parchment. "If Denise is right," he said, voice dropping, "and the wall is failing." Jorah's gaze went to the small window that looked out at the wall's pale curve. "Then the realm will have bigger concerns than who sits a chair in King's Landing." Eliezer scoffed, but it was weaker now. "The realm doesn't care about us," he said. "We guard their nightmares. They thank us with empty granaries." Jorah's mouth twisted, not in disagreement, but in weariness. "And yet, we guard it all the same." He turned to Bowen. "Right to Winterfell," he said. "Right to every lord who ever swore the Watch an ounce of loyalty. Right to King's Landing, whether they read it or not. Tell them Denny's Mallister has sounded the third blast. Tell them the dead are moving." Bowen nodded, swallowing hard. "And what do we do?" Jorah's eyes found Jon again. "We do what we've always done," he said. "We hold." Outside, the horn sounded again. One blast, then another, then the third. And this time it came from Castle Black itself, the long, mournful call ripping through stone and snow and flesh. Jon felt Ghost's hackles rise. The direwolf let out a low growl that vibrated through Jon's leg. Eliezer's face had gone pale. He tried to hide it, but fear had teeth, and it showed. Jorah moved faster than Jon would believe the man his age could, shoving open the solar door. The corridor beyond was a flurry of motion. Men running, boots pounding, voices shouting. "Man the wall!" Jorah barked. "Torches! Oil! Get the archers up!" Jon followed, heart hammering. As they climbed the stairs, the cold hit them like a slap. The wall loomed ahead, and beyond it the world was white and endless. Jon reached the top and looked north. At first he saw nothing. Then, far along the wall to the west, he saw it. A faint tremor in the line of ice, a shiver that didn't belong. The pale surface seemed to ripple, as if something beneath was pushing. A crack. Even from this distance, Jon could see a thin black seam splitting the wall's face like a wound. And over the wind, over the shouting, over the ringing of the third blast, Jon heard something else. So low he felt it more than heard it. A deep, steady vibration, like a giant drum struck far away. The wall was singing a song of breaking. The first dead man came in the night. It wasn't from the wall. It wasn't from the gate. It came from inside, as if the darkness itself had learned to put on flesh and walk the halls of Castle Black. Jon was half asleep when Ghost's growl snapped him awake. The direwolf stood rigid beside his bed, lips peeled back, eyes fixed on the door. Jon's heart lurched into his throat. He reached for his sword, fingers closing around cold leather. A sound came from the corridor, soft, like a foot dragging. Jon rose, bare feet on stone, and opened the door just enough to see. Torchlight flickered down the hall. Shadows moved, long and distorted. He saw Sam's door across from his, the gap beneath it leaking a thin line of light. Sam awake too then. The dragging sound came again, closer, and Jon caught a smell that didn't belong in the cold, clean air of the wall. Rot. Old blood. The sour stench of a grave opened after winter. He didn't think. He moved. The corridor was empty for 3 paces, then the darkness shifted, and a shape stepped into the torchlight as if it had been waiting for him to see it. A man, or what had once been one. Its skin was a sickly gray, tight across bone. Frost rimed its beard. Its eyes were open, but nothing lit behind them. One arm hung at an angle that made Jon's stomach twist, the bone broken and healed wrong. The thing's mouth opened, and a rattle came out, breathless and hungry. Jon's grip tightened on his sword. "Back," he said, voice hoarse. It lunged. Jon slashed, steel biting into dead flesh. The blade cut, but the thing didn't scream, didn't slow. It crashed into him with the weight of cold meat, hands like iron clamps closing on his shoulders. Jon staggered back, boots slipping on stone slick with frost. Ghost hit it from the side, a white blur. Teeth sank into dead flesh. The thing didn't bleed. It didn't care. It flung Ghost aside with unnatural strength, and the direwolf yelped, scrambling. Jon drove his knee up, felt it strike ribs that gave too easily. The Wight's head snapped back, then forward again, jaws snapping inches from Jon's throat. Its breath was winter itself, a taste of tombs. A door burst open behind Jon. Sam spilled into the hall, hair wild, eyes huge. "Jon!" he squeaked, and his voice cracked like a boy's. The Wight turned its head toward the sound as if drawn by living breath. Jon shoved it back and heard footsteps pounding from the far end of the corridor. Jor's voice sharp with command. "What in seven hells?" Jor rounded the corner, a torch in one hand, a dagger in the other. His face hardened the moment he saw the thing. It launched itself at him with a speed that made Jon's blood run cold. Jor lifted the torch instinctively. Flame caught the Wight's sleeve, then its hair, then its skin, and for the first time it made a sound. Not pain, not fear, but a furious, rattling hiss, like ice plunging into fire. It didn't stop. Burning, it slammed into Jor, hands clawing at his throat. Jon moved like a man falling off a cliff. He grabbed the nearest lamp from a wall sconce and hurled it. Oil splashed across the Wight and Jor, and the flame roared up, hungry and bright. Jor staggered back, coughing, cloak smoking. The Wight became a torch. Fire crawled across it, consuming cloth and flesh. It thrashed, flailing arms, and in that frantic motion it knocked into a wooden beam. The beam caught, then the rafters. Smoke filled the corridor. Jon's eyes burned. Sam coughed, stumbling back, hands over his mouth. "Get water!" someone shouted, and boots pounded away. Jon's sword flashed again, slicing through burning shoulder, hacking at neck. The blade stuck for a heartbeat in charred bone before tearing free. The Wight fell, still moving, hands scraping at the stone as if it could crawl away from the fire that ate it. Ghost lunged again, jaws closing on its skull, and this time the dead man's movement stilled, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. For a moment, there was only the crackle of flame, the hiss of burning oil, the harsh sound of men breathing too fast. Jor wiped soot from his face with the back of his hand, his eyes fixed on Jon, and something unreadable passed through them. Gratitude, shock, and a deeper dread that settled like lead. "That was one of the bodies," Jor said, voice rough. "The one we brought from beyond the wall." Jon's mouth was dry. He nodded. Aemon appeared at the corridor's far end, guided by a brother's arm. The old maester's blind face was turned toward the smoke. "It begins," he murmured, as if speaking to something only he could hear. Eliezer shoved through the crowd, his face twisted in fury. "This is your doing," he snapped at Jon, as if blame could stop the dead. "Your wolf, your—" Jor cut him off with a glare. "Enough." Sam stood pressed against the wall, trembling, eyes fixed on the charred remains on the stone. "How?" he whispered. "How did it get—" Jor didn't answer, because there was no answer that made sense. There was only the fact. The dead had reached into the Watch's own halls. The wall had not kept them out. Somewhere outside, beyond the stone and the ice and the smoke, the third horn sounded again, and Jon felt it in his teeth like a warning. They put out the fire, but the stink of smoke lingered, clinging to stone and wool and skin. Castle Black felt smaller afterward, as if the walls had shifted inward during the night. Jor called them together before dawn, when the sky was still a bruised gray and the cold bit hardest. Bowen sat at the table with a pot of ink and a stack of parchment, writing by the light of a single candle that trembled like a frightened thing. Each time the flame flickered, shadows jumped across the room, and Jon found himself watching them too closely. Aemon sat with his hands folded in his lap, expression calm, as if he were listening to a distant storm. Sam hovered near the shelves, clutching a book like a shield. Jon stood beside the hearth with Ghost at his feet, fingers closing and opening around nothing. His hands still smelled faintly of burned flesh. Jeor began without ceremony. "Denys reports the wall cracking at the Shadow Tower," he said. "Now we have proof the dead move at their master's will." Bowen's quill paused. "Proof," he repeated, as if the word might make it less monstrous. Jeor's gaze slid to Jon. "You stopped it with fire." Jon nodded once. "It didn't feel pain," he said. "It didn't stop until it burned." Aemon's voice was like a dry leaf turning. "Fire is life," he murmured. "And ice is death." Sam swallowed. There are accounts," he blurted, then flinched at the sound of his own voice. "Old ones. In the library. About dragonglass." Jeor's eyes narrowed. "Dragonglass. Obsidian," Sam said quickly, as if eager to show he was useful, eager to not be dismissed. "There are records from the Age of Heroes that say the others fear it. That it can kill them." "Nay." The word kill felt strange in the room, as if it didn't belong when spoken about things that were already dead. Jeor's jaw tightened. "We have no dragonglass." Sam's gaze dropped. "No," he admitted. "But there might be. There are mentions of caches in the far north and on Dragonstone." Jon had heard of Dragonstone only in the way men spoke of places far away, exotic and dangerous. A black island with a castle shaped like dragons held by the king's brother. It might as well have been across the sea. Bowen's quill scratched again. "Dragonstone belongs to Stannis Baratheon," he said, "and the name dragged the realm's politics into their cold room like mud tracked on boots. If we right him, we right everyone," Jeor said. "We right Winterfell, White Harbor, the Eyrie, River Run, King's Landing, Stannis, Renly, any man with a banner and a sword. All of them are at war," Bowen said, and there was bitterness in it, the sour taste of being forgotten. "The realm is tearing itself apart. Then we must tear it back together," Jeor snapped. He shoved a parchment toward Bowen. "Tell them the wall is failing. Tell them the dead have crossed into our halls. Tell them if they do not come north, there will be no south left to fight over." "Nah, dear." Bowen's hands trembled as he dipped the quill. Jeor turned to Jon. "You will ride west with the first men," he said. "We need eyes on the Shadow Tower. If the wall has cracked, we may already be too late," Aemon said quietly. Jeor's gaze held steady, but Jon saw the strain at the corner of his mouth. "Then we bring back survivors," Jeor said. "And we bring back truth." Eliezer barged in, as if summoned by the scent of conflict. His eyes flicked to the charred sleeve Jon held, then away, as if refusing to accept what it meant. "You're sending him?" Eliezer said, contempt thick. "The bastard." Jeor didn't even look at him. "I'm sending a man who has seen the enemy and didn't run." Eliezer's face flushed. "He's a boy." Jeor finally met his gaze. "He's a brother of the Watch," he said, and there was iron in it. "And if you undermine me again, Thorn, I will have you scrubbing latrines until your hands bleed." Eliezer's mouth opened, then closed. He threw Jon a look full of poison and stalked out. Jon exhaled slowly. Ghost pressed against his shin, steadying. Sam's voice wavered. Will they listen?" he asked. And Jon didn't know whether he meant the lords of the realm or the gods. Jorah's eyes went to the window again, to the pale curve of the wall. "They will," he said, and it sounded more like a threat than a promise. "Or they will die ignorant." Bowen sealed the first message with black wax and the imprint of the Watch. "To Winterfell," he said, voice small. Jeor nodded. "To Winterfell first." Jon's mind flashed to stone walls and warm kitchens, to Bran's laughter before his fall, to Robb's serious eyes. He tasted ash. The raven beat its wings as Bowen tied the message to its leg. For a heartbeat, the bird looked at Jon with an uncanny intelligence, as if it understood the weight it carried. Then it leapt into the gray morning and vanished into snow. Winterfell held winter the way a wolf held a bone, stubbornly, possessively, as if it could not imagine letting go. Bran watched snow swirl past the narrow windows of the great hall, white on gray on white, and tried not to think about the way the cold sank deeper into the stone every day. The fire in the hearth crackled, throwing warmth across the rushes, but it didn't reach his legs. It never reached his legs. Maester Luwin came in with a raven scroll and a face like a man carrying a death sentence. Sir Roderick followed, his boots leaving wet marks on the stone, mail glinting dull. Theon Greyjoy lounged near a pillar, tossing a knife from hand to hand, pretending boredom like it was armor. Bran's eyes tracked the raven message. He'd learned to read since his fall, learned letters with the same stubbornness he'd once used to climb towers. He wanted the words. He wanted to be part of whatever the grown men were always whispering about. Luwin broke the seal. The black wax cracked with a sound like a bone snapping. He read, lips moving slightly. Bran watched his eyes widen, then tighten, as if trying to shut something out. Sir Roderick's hand drifted toward his sword belt without thinking. Theon's knife stopped mid-toss and dropped into his palm. "What is it?" Bran asked, voice sharper than he intended. Luwin looked up, and Bran saw something in his face that made his stomach twist. Fear, naked and unadorned. "It is from the wall," Luwin said. "From Castle Black." Bran's heart jumped. Jon.I. He'd been thinking of Jon more lately, of the way his brother's smile had always been a little sad. "Is Jon—" Bran began. "Lord Commander Mormont writes of trouble," Luwin said carefully, as if choosing words that wouldn't cut. "Off. The dead." Theon snorted softly. "The dead," he echoed as if tasting the phrase. "Now there's a cheerful letter." Sir Roderick shot him a look. "Hold your tongue." Theon lifted his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes had lost some of their play. "Come now," he said, voice lighter than it ought to be. "We've all heard the tales. The watch frightens children so they don't wander into the woods." Luwin's gaze fixed on Theon, and for once there was steel in it. "This letter is not meant to frighten children," he said. "It is meant to frighten lords." Bran leaned forward. "Read it," he demanded, and the command surprised even him. He'd been a lord once in name before his fall. In truth, he was a boy in a chair. But the words in that raven scroll felt like they belonged to him. Luwin hesitated, then began again, voice low. Bran heard phrases that made his skin prickle. 3 blasts. Cracking ice. Corpses that walked. The wall failing. When Luwin finished, the hall seemed quieter, as if the very stone listened. Sir Roderick cleared his throat. "If this is true," he said, voice rough, "we must send riders to the bannermen. Ready the walls. Gather grain." Theon scoffed again, but it came out strained. "Ready the walls against snowmen?" Roderick's hand slammed onto the table hard enough to make cups jump. "Against whatever comes," he snapped. "You weren't raised here, Greyjoy. You don't know what old men in the north remember when they sit by the fire and refuse to speak." Theon's smile faltered. For a heartbeat, Bran saw something behind it. A flicker of the hostage boy Theon once was, taken from his father and raised among wolves. "Old men remember a lot of nonsense," Theon muttered, but his fingers tightened around his knife. Bran's mind drifted, unbidden, to the crypts beneath Winterfell. He'd gone down there once with Rickon, their footsteps echoing among stone kings. The air had been cold and dry, and the statues had watched them with carved eyes that seemed too real in torchlight. There were swords on their laps, iron meant to keep the dead in place. Old stories said so. "Send to Robb," Bran said, and the words came out before he thought them through. Robb was south, with swords and banners and anger. Robb was fighting a war for vengeance and honor. Robb needed to know there was another war coming. one that didn't care about oaths. Lewin nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "We send to your brother." Sir Roderick rubbed a hand over his beard. "And to White Harbor," he added. "Lord Manderley still has ships, if the wall falls." "If it falls," Theon said, and even his cynicism sounded like a prayer. Bran's eyes fixed on the Raven. "What about Jon?" he asked. Lewin's face softened. "Just a fraction. Jon is where he chose to be," he said. "He will do his duty, as we must do ours." Gay. Outside, the wind howled around the towers of Winterfell, a sound like wolves baying at the moon. Bran felt gooseflesh rise on his arms. Somewhere in the castle, a direwolf answered, a low, mournful sound that rolled through stone and bone. Bran didn't know why, but he felt certain, in that moment, that the wall's crack was not just ice splitting. It was something old waking up. The Riverlands smelled like damp earth and old smoke. Even in winter, even with frost in the grass, war warmed the ground with blood. Robb stood bent over a map that was more stained than parchment now. Edges frayed, corners curled. Candles burned down to thick nubs, wax pooling like fat. The tent was crowded with men who carried the North on their shoulders. Broad-shouldered, fur-cloaked eyes that had learned to look for betrayal in every shadow. Catelyn stood at Robb's side, close enough that her sleeve brushed his arm. She could feel the tension in him like a wire pulled too tight. He was a boy still, in years, but war had carved the softness out of him. He wore his crown less like a prize and more like a weight. When the Raven came, its wings beating against the canvas like frantic fists, every man in the tent went still. Robb took the message from the maester with careful hands. The seal of the watch was there. Black wax? The imprint of a tower and a wolf? No. A castle and a sword. A promise. He read in silence, and Catelyn watched his face change. His eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened around the parchment. Great Jon Umber leaned forward, impatience radiating off him like heat. "Well?" he boomed. "Has the lion sent you another love letter?" Robb looked up, and for a moment Catelyn saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since Winterfell. Fear, raw, and young. "It's from the wall," Robb said. Roose Bolton's pale gaze flicked to the parchment, then to Robb's face, measuring. "From the watch," he murmured. "They rarely write unless desperate." "They speak of the dead walking," Robb said, and the tent seemed to tilt, as if the words had weight. Greyjon barked a laugh. "The dead? I've seen plenty of dead. Doesn't make them dangerous unless they've got swords." "No." Catelyn's hand found Robb's arm. "What does it say?" she asked. Robb swallowed. "3 blasts," he said. "A crack in the wall. A Wight attacked the Lord Commander in Castle Black." The word Wight tasted wrong. Catelyn remembered old Nan's stories, told by firelight to children who giggled and shivered and begged for more. She remembered laughing, once. She didn't laugh now. Roose Bolton tilted his head. "If the wall cracks," he said softly, "then the North is exposed." "The North is exposed now," Greyjon growled. "We're all down here chasing Lannisters while our lands freeze." "That is why we must finish this quickly," Robb said, voice hardening. And Catelyn felt his fear turn to anger, because anger was easier to hold. "We've taken Jaime. We've won battles. We can force Tywin to terms." Roose's mouth twitched in something that might have been a smile. "Tywin Lannister does not make terms," he said. "He makes examples." Greyjon slammed his fist on the table, making candles wobble. "Then we should be making examples too," he roared. "March on the Twins, on Harrenhal, on wherever the lion hides his cubs. And abandon the North?" Catelyn cut in, sharper than she meant. "Leave Winterfell with boys and old men while this comes." The tent went quiet. Men shifted, boots scraping. Someone coughed. Robb's eyes met hers, and Catelyn saw the war in him. 2 wars, pulling in opposite directions. Honor demanded he press south, avenge his father, free his sisters. Duty demanded he turn north, protect his people, believe in nightmares. "What would you have me do?" Robb asked, voice low. "If I turn north now, Tywin will fall on the Riverlands like a butcher. Our allies will call us oathbreakers. The Freys will close their bridge. We will be trapped between enemies. And if you stay," Catelyn said, "you may return to a north with no living left to greet you." Grey Jon snorted. "If the dead come, we'll kill them again," he said. "Steel and fire, it's all the same." A memory rose in Catelyn then, unbidden. A winter long past, when the snows piled high and the wolves came close to the walls. She remembered men speaking in hushed voices about things beyond the trees, things that watched. She remembered her father's face when he spoke of the long night, not as a story, but as history. Robb looked down at the letter again, as if hoping it would change. "I can't leave," he said finally, and the words sounded like he was cutting off a limb. "Not yet." Catelyn's fingers tightened on his arm. "Robb." "I'll send men," Robb said quickly, as if trying to bandage the wound he'd just made. 1,000. As many as I can spare without breaking our line. I'll send them to Winterfell, to the Neck. I'll write to the Watch that we're coming when we can." Ruzi's pale eyes flickered. 1,000 men against an army of the dead, he murmured, almost to himself. Grey Jon grinned, teeth bared. 1,000 Northmen are worth 10,000 Southrons, he said, thumping his chest. "Send me. I'll carve the dead into kindling." Robb didn't smile. His gaze went to the tent flap, to the gray light beyond. "We cannot fight every war," he said quietly. "But we will try." Catelyn looked at her son and saw a king made too soon. Outside, the raven that had brought the message hopped in the mud, shaking snow from its wings, then lifted into the air again, black against gray, carrying fear back into the world. The crack became a canyon. Denys watched it widen with a horror that felt almost like betrayal. The wall had always been an absolute in his life, the line that separated the world men fought over from the world men feared. To see it split was to watch the sky itself break open. Ice groaned. The sound was deep, like a giant waking and stretching its limbs. The fissure ran downward, spidering, branching, a black vein through white flesh. Men on the wall shouted. Some wept. Some cursed. Denys forced them to work, because there was nothing else to do. They hauled barrels of oil to the parapet. They lit pitch-soaked rags. They prepared bows, not because arrows would stop a thing like this, but because hands needed something to hold. Below, the Wights surged toward the crack as if drawn by a scent. They moved with jerky urgency, bodies colliding, climbing over each other, a tide of dead flesh. Some fell and broke and kept crawling. Denys leaned over the parapet and felt bile rise. Among them were black cloaks, brothers of the Watch, men who had stood where Denys stood, who had sworn the same vows, now stumbling forward with mouths open and eyes empty. "Light it!" Denys roared. Barrels tipped. Oil spilled in glossy sheets, cascading down the wall's face. Torches hurled. Flames caught with a hungry roar, leaping up in orange tongues. The heat slapped Denys' face, and for a heartbeat the cold retreated. The Wights burned. They didn't scream like living men. They made a noise like wet wood snapping, like breath escaping a cracked lung. But they burned, and some of them fell back, flailing, and for a heartbeat Denys felt hope flare. Then the cold came again, harder, sharper. The flames guttered, their edges turning pale, as if the fire itself hesitated. Denys stared, and his blood went cold in a way the winter had never managed. In the clearing beyond the trees, the Pale Rider stood. The storm swirled around it, but it remained untouched. Its armor looked like ice sculpted into plates, its face a mask of cold beauty and cruelty, eyes blue as frozen lakes. It did not move like a man. It moved like a law. Daenerys felt that gaze lift, and in it he saw not hatred, not rage, but a vast indifference. Like winter itself looking down on a candle. The rider raised one arm. The crack in the wall widened in answer. Daenerys heard men around him whimper. He felt his own throat tighten so hard it hurt. "Loose!" he shouted again, because shouting was all he had left. Arrows flew. They struck Wights, stuck in dead flesh, and the dead kept coming. A few arrows hissed toward the rider. They fell short, lost in the storm, swallowed by the cold. A sound like stone grinding against stone rose from the wall. Daenerys watched the fissure reach the base, watched it snake into the ice beneath the wall walk, watched as the great slab of ancient ice on the far side began to lean. "No," he whispered. And it wasn't a prayer. It was disbelief. The wall shifted. For a breath, it held, like a man pausing before a fall. Then it broke. Ice thundered down in a roar that drowned out every shout, every horn, every heartbeat. A section of the wall collapsed outward, exploding into shards and snow. The impact sent a gust of frozen air up into Daenerys' face so hard it stole his breath. When the snow cleared, there was a gap where there had never been a gap. A jagged slope of broken ice led down into the haunted forest like a wound, raw and exposed. The dead surged toward it with mindless hunger. Daenerys didn't think. He acted. "To the gate!" he shouted. "Fall back! Hold the tower!" Men scrambled down ladders, slipping on ice made slick by panic. Daenerys forced himself to move with them, boots skidding. He didn't look back at the gap, because if he looked too long, he might freeze in place like a statue. In the yard below, brothers formed a line, spears forward, torches held high. Their faces were pale beneath their hoods, eyes wide. The Wights began to pour down the broken slope, bodies tumbling, rising, climbing, the first of them reaching the yard with an eagerness that made Daenerys' skin crawl. "Fire!" Daenerys screamed. Torches flew. Oil burned. The first wave of Wights caught, flames licking at their clothes, their skin. They stumbled, fell, and the wave behind them climbed over their burning bodies. Daenerys drove his spear through a dead man's chest. The spear went in with a sick ease. The Wight didn't slow. Its hands closed around Daenerys' shaft, fingers like iron, and it pulled itself closer, mouth snapping. Daenerys twisted, yanked, drove the spear again up into the throat. The head lolled. Still, the body moved, reaching, clawing. A brother beside Daenerys screamed as a Wight sank teeth into his neck. Blood sprayed hot against Daenerys' cheek. The brother's scream turned into a gurgle, then silence. Daenerys slammed his torch into the Wight's face. Fire blossomed. The dead thing flailed back, burning, and Daenerys hauled the bitten brother away. But the man's eyes were already glassy. More came. Always more. Over the roar of battle, Daenerys heard the horn again. Not the watch horn, but that deep, mournful call, rolling across the broken ice like a laugh without joy. He looked up through the storm and saw the pale rider step forward, descending the shattered slope with unhurried grace. The wall had fallen. The world was open. They left Castle Black with the taste of smoke still in their mouths. Jor sent 20 men west, as many as he could spare without stripping the wall bare. Jon rode among them, the cold biting through his gloves, reins stiff with frost. Ghost ran alongside the horses in a pale blur, paws silent on snow. Eliezer led, because Jor didn't have time for pride wars, and because Eliezer knew the wall's length like a man knew his own scars. He rode with his shoulders squared, jaw clenched, as if he could scare the cold into obedience through sheer contempt. The wall rose to their right, a towering cliff of white that swallowed light. On their left, the haunted forest stretched away. Black pines hunched under snow like old men in prayer. The world was narrow and brutal, ice to one side, darkness to the other, and a thin ribbon of path between. No one spoke much. Breath steamed. Hooves crunched. Every sound felt too loud, as if the cold itself listened. Jon rode near Jor, because that was where he'd been ordered, and because he felt safer there, though he didn't know why. The Lord Commander's face was grim, eyes fixed ahead as if he could already see the break in the world waiting for them. "How far?" Jon asked finally, voice muffled by scarf. Jor didn't look at him. "If Daenerys is still alive," he said, "we'll know soon enough." Eliezer snorted. "If he isn't," he muttered, "we'll know too." The words hung in the air, sharp as icicles. They passed abandoned castles along the wall, their gates half buried in snow, towers crumbling. Jon had heard the names: Greyguard, Stone Door, Hoarfrost Hill, spoken like ghosts. Each one looked like a warning carved in stone. This is what happens when men stop believing they need each other. As they rode, the cold deepened. It wasn't the honest cold of winter, the kind that made cheeks sting and fingers ache. This cold felt intent. It seeped in, crawled under wool and fur, settled into lungs like damp ash. Jon saw men's faces tighten, saw their eyes widen, saw the way their breaths came faster without them meaning to. Ghosts slowed, ears flat, nose to the ground as if tracking a scent only he could smell. The direwolf's fur bristled. Eliezer noticed and spat into the snow. "That beast," he muttered. "He senses your kind, Snow." Jon's hands tightened on the reins, but he forced himself to say nothing. Eliezer's hatred was familiar. It was the unknown ahead that made his stomach twist. The first sign they were close came as a sound, a deep, distant rumble, like thunder trapped beneath ice. The horses shied. One of the younger brothers cursed, struggling to calm his mount. Then they saw it. A plume of white dust rose into the gray sky ahead, drifting on the wind like ash. Beneath it, the wall's clean line was broken, jagged, uneven. Jon's throat went dry. He'd never seen the wall anything but whole. The sight of it fractured felt obscene, like seeing a god bleed. Jor pulled his horse to a stop. The men behind him did the same, a ragged line of black against white. For a moment, no one moved. Then a scream carried on the wind from the west, high and human, cut short too quickly. Eliezer's face drained of color. "Ride," Jor said, and there was no hesitation in him now, only command. They spurred their horses forward. The path narrowed as the ground began to slope. The air grew colder still, and Jon's breath came out in thick clouds that seemed to fall heavy, reluctant to rise. As they crested a rise, the shadow tower came into view. Its dark stone hunched against the wall like a fist. Smoke curled from somewhere within, thin and gray. The yard below was chaos. Black cloaks running, flames flaring, bodies on snow. And beyond the tower, where the wall should have been a solid white cliff, there was a jagged gap that looked like a mouth torn open. Jon tasted iron. "Gods," he whispered, and Ghost growled low at his side, the sound like a warning from something older than men. The yard smelled like burning tallow and blood. Jon barely remembered dismounting. One moment he was in the saddle, the next his boots hit snow that had turned to slush under spilled oil and fire. Men shouted, voices raw. Steel rang. A scream rose and broke like a wave. Jorah's voice cut through it all. "Form a line," he bellowed. "Torches forward. Keep them back." Jon's eyes darted across the yard, trying to make sense of the chaos. Brothers of the Watch fought with torches and spears, their black cloaks flapping. Flames bloomed where oil had been thrown, turning patches of snow into boiling mud. Bodies lay scattered, some still, some moving. Then Jon realized why some moved. A dead man in a black cloak crawled toward him, fingers digging into slush, eyes empty. Its mouth worked silently, lips peeled back from teeth. Jon's stomach lurched. He drove his sword down, pinning the Wight to the ground. The blade went through ribs with sick ease. The Wight's hands flailed, grasping for him. "Fire!" someone screamed, and a torch slammed onto the Wight's chest. Flames caught, and the dead thing finally stilled as its flesh blackened and shrank. Jon forced himself to keep breathing. He spotted Daenerys near the tower wall, slumped against stone like a man who'd been hollowed out. His cloak was torn. Frost clung to his beard. Blood stained his sleeve, dark against black. Jon ran to him, ghost at his heels. Daenerys' eyes flicked up, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he recognized the black cloaks, the reinforcements. "Jor," Daenerys rasped, voice barely more than breath. "You came." Jor strode over, boots splashing. He crouched beside Daenerys, one hand gripping the man's shoulder. "Hold on," he said, and for a heartbeat Jon heard something like affection in him. "Tell me what happened." Daenerys' laugh came out wet. "What happened?" he echoed, and his eyes flicked toward the gap in the wall. The wall broke. Jor's jaw clenched. "How?" Daenerys swallowed, and Jon saw his throat work painfully. "A sound," Daenerys said, "like a horn, not ours. It made the ice sing." Then the crack. A Wight slammed into the line near them, knocking a brother down. The brother's torch skittered away, flames sputtering. The Wight fell on him, teeth snapping. Jon moved without thinking, grabbing the torch and driving it into the Wight's face. Fire blossomed, and the dead thing recoiled, hands flailing. Jon swung his sword, severing its arm. The limb fell, still twitching. The brother on the ground scrambled back, eyes wild. "Thank you," he gasped. Jon didn't answer. His focus was on the gap. From here he could see the broken slope of ice leading down into the haunted forest, see the stream of Wights pouring up like ants from a nest. There were too many to count. Hundreds. Thousands. Bodies of wildlings, of beasts, of men in black. A tide of dead flesh. And behind them, on the broken ice, something pale moved. Jon's breath caught. Figures. Tall, lean, their armor catching what little light there was with a dull, icy gleam. Their eyes burned blue in the storm, steady and cold. They moved with terrifying grace, stepping over broken bodies without looking down. White Walkers. Jon had heard the stories. He'd laughed at them once, years ago, the way boys laughed at monsters when they still believed the world was safe. Now his laughter tasted like ash. Jor followed his gaze. Jon saw the Lord Commander's face tighten, saw his eyes harden. "Archers!" Jor shouted. "Loose!" Arrows flew from the parapet, black streaks against white. They hit Wights, knocked them down, and the dead kept climbing. Some arrows struck the pale figures on the slope. They shattered against armor like sticks thrown at stone. Daenerys watched, eyes hollow. "They don't care," he whispered. "They don't." His words cut off as his body jerked. Jon looked down and saw a Wight's hand had reached from the slush and grabbed Daenerys' ankle. Dead fingers dug in, pulling. Daenerys' eyes widened. His breath hitched. Jon slammed his torch down onto the hand. Fire took it. The Wight beneath the slush writhed, its pale face surfacing, mouth open, teeth snapping inches from Daenerys' boot. Jor grabbed Daenerys under the arms and hauled him up with a grunt, dragging him back against the stone. "Hold." Jor snarled as if the word could stitch flesh. Daenerys' breath came in ragged gasps. "There's more," he said, eyes glazing. "Not just Wights." Jor's gaze flicked to the slope again. "I see them." A shout rose from the gatehouse. "They're coming through the gap," a brother screamed. "They're inside." Jon turned and saw it, a wave of Wights cresting the broken ice, spilling into the yard like black water. Jor rose, drawing his sword. The blade looked small against the tide. "Hold the line," Jor roared. "For the watch." Jon lifted his torch, feeling heat against his face, and stepped forward into the slush and smoke and screaming. Ghost bared his teeth. A white wolf against the dead. The wall had fallen, and now the Watch was the only thing standing between the dead and the world. Jon didn't know how he got onto the broken ice. One moment he was in the yard, boots sinking into slush, torch in hand, cutting down wights that came too close. The next, he was higher, standing on a jagged ridge of shattered wall, looking down into the haunted forest where the snow churned with bodies. The slope beneath his boots was slick. Ice creaked under his weight. He could feel the emptiness behind him where the wall had been. A gap in the world. Ghost crouched beside him, fur bristling, a low growl vibrating through his ribs. Jon's breath came out in thick clouds. The air tasted sharp, metallic, like biting into a coin. His fingers ached around the torch. He was the only thing that felt real. A wight scrambled up the ice toward him, hands clawing. Jon kicked it back, and it tumbled down into the mass below, disappearing beneath reaching arms. Then the dead stopped. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't like men hesitating under arrow fire. It was as if a hand had closed around their throats. Wights froze mid-climb. Arms hung suspended. Mouths open in silent hunger. Even the storm seemed to hush. Jon's blood went cold. He turned slowly. A figure stood a few steps away on the broken ice, as if it had simply appeared from the storm. It was taller than any man Jon had known, and slimmer, built with a cruel elegance. Armor clung to it like frozen smoke, plates of ice that caught the dim light and turned it into something dead. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were blue. Not the blue of sky or sea, the blue of deep ice. The blue of a flame that gave no warmth. Jon's heart hammered so hard he felt it in his throat. He lifted his sword, though it felt absurd, steel against winter. The figure regarded him without expression, without movement, like a statue carved from coal. Jon couldn't read it. There was no rage in its face, no triumph, only certainty. Ghost snarled, a sound that should have made anything flinch. The figure didn't blink. Somewhere behind Jon, Jor shouted, muffled by wind. "Jon, get back!" Jon didn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off the thing in front of him. The figure lifted one hand, slow, deliberate. Frost shimmered in the air around its fingers, sparkling like glass dust. Jon felt something in that motion. A command, a threat, a promise. The wights below twitched as if eager to obey. Jon's mind flashed to Sam's words. Dragon glass. The others fear it. He had none, only steel and fire. His hand tightened on the torch. The figure's gaze dropped to the flame. For the first time, Jon thought he saw something in it. A faint narrowing, a flicker of consideration. Not fear, but awareness. Jon took a step forward because he was a fool, because he was young, because if he stepped back now, he would never forgive himself. The ice creaked under his boot. Ghost shifted, ready to spring. The figure tilted its head, almost curious. Jon's sword rose. "Go back," he said, voice shaking despite himself. "Go back north." The wind snatched his words. The figure didn't answer. It moved. Not with the clumsy lunge of a wight, with a smooth swiftness that made Jon's eyes struggle to track. A blade appeared in its hand, long and thin, shimmering like a shard of frozen moonlight. Jon swung. Steel cut through air. The figure stepped aside as if bored, the icy blade flicking out. Jon felt a sudden violent impact on his sword arm, cold so intense it burned. His blade shuddered. For a heartbeat, steel sang in agony. Then his sword shattered. Fragments of dark metal sprayed across the ice. Jon stared, stunned, holding a hilt with no blade. The cold in his arm crawled up toward his shoulder like poison. Panic surged. Jon stumbled back, nearly slipping. Ghost lunged, teeth bared. The figure's blade flashed toward Ghost. Jon's torch moved on instinct. He slammed the burning end into the figure's arm. Fire kissed ice. For the first time, the figure recoiled, not in pain but in surprise. Frost hissed. A thin crack ran across its armor where the flame touched. Jon seized that heartbeat. He grabbed Ghost by the scruff and hauled the wolf back, nearly falling himself. He turned and ran, boots scrabbling for purchase on slick ice, heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Behind him, the figure lifted its hand again. The Wights below surged back into motion with a roar of dead hunger, climbing, reaching, spilling over broken ice. Jor's torch flared in the yard. Men screamed. The battle swallowed sound. Jon slid down the slope, half falling, landing hard in slush. He rolled. Came up with his torch still lit and his sword arm numb. Ghost pressed against him, trembling, alive. Jor grabbed him by the collar and yanked him behind the line. "Are you mad?" Jor snarled, eyes blazing. Jon couldn't speak. His mouth was full of cold. He looked back up the broken slope and saw the pale figure still standing there, watching him, eyes blue and endless. Jon realized with a clarity that made him sick that the thing hadn't tried to kill him. It had measured him, and it had found him wanting. He pulled back from the shadow tower at dusk, what was left of them, dragging wounded men and leaving bodies behind because there was no time to burn them all. Denny's was carried on a door ripped from its hinges, eyes half-lidded, breath shallow. Jor rode beside him, grim as stone. Behind them, smoke curled from the western end of the wall like a funeral veil. Castle Black greeted them with shouting and scrambling, with men hauling barrels of oil, sharpening axes, piling timber for pyres. The air tasted of fear now, a flavor Jon could not spit out. Jon's right arm throbbed. The cold that had struck it on the ice still lingered in his bones, a deep ache that didn't feel like injury so much as something inside him remembering winter. Aemon examined it with careful fingers, then wrapped it in cloth warmed by the fire. "You must keep it near heat," the old maester said. "Do not let it settle." Jon stared at his useless sword hilt on the table. He couldn't stop seeing the moment the blade shattered, the ease with which the icy weapon had done it. Steel meant nothing. Skill meant nothing. All the training in the yard, all the sweat and bruises. It felt suddenly like boys play fighting in the shadow of a storm. Sam found him in the library that night, candlelight painting his round face in trembling gold. He looked like he'd aged a year in a day. Soot smudged his cheek. His hands shook around a book he held open. "I found something," Sam said, and his voice was too bright, too eager, as if he could talk fast enough to outrun despair. "In an old account. It's not a tale. It's written by a maester who served at the Nightfort centuries ago." "Nine?" Jon's eyes flicked to the book. The pages were brittle. The ink was faded but still legible. "What does it say?" Sam swallowed. "It says the others were driven back not by steel," he said. "Not by armies. By dragonglass and fire and something else." Aemon's blind head turned toward them. "Something else," he echoed. Sam nodded quickly. "A horn," he said, almost whispering. "It says there was a horn once, older than the Watch. It could wake giants or break ice. Some called it the Horn of Winter. Some called it Jormun's Horn. Nay, Wanda." Jon felt his skin prickle. "A horn," he repeated, thinking of the sound Denny's had described, the vibration in the wall, the way the ice had answered. Jor stood by the table, listening. He looked tired in a way Jon had never seen in him before, as if every year of his life had landed on his shoulders at once. "You think they have it," Jor said. Sam's mouth opened and closed. "I don't know," he admitted. "But, Lord Commander," the wall cracked like something struck it from within, like the spells were loosened. "Mayo." Aemon's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "The wall is more than ice," he murmured. "It is oath and sacrifice, Old powers woven into stone and snow. If it breaks, it can't break, Bowen said sharply from the doorway, clutching a ledger. His face was pinched, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. If it breaks, the watch is finished. The North is finished. We cannot. Jor's gaze pinned him. It has broken, Jor said, voice quiet and deadly, and Bowen went pale. Silence settled. Somewhere above them, ravens fluttered in their cages, restless. Jon imagined them feeling the cold in the air, sensing the change. Animals knew before men did. Ghost had known. Jor rubbed a hand over his beard. We need dragon glass, he said, as if saying it made it more attainable. We need fire. We need men. We have no men, Bowen said bitterly. We have boys. We have thieves and rapers and broken farmers who wanted a meal. Jon's hands clenched. We have brothers, he said, surprising himself with the force of it. Bowen's gaze flicked to him, unreadable. Do we? He asked. Jor's hand slammed onto the table. Enough, he snapped. We can argue when we're dead. For now, we prepare. He looked at Sam. Find every mention of dragonglass, of the horn, of anything that kills them. Sam's eyes widened. Then he nodded fiercely. I will, he promised, and Jon believed he meant it with his whole frightened heart. Jor turned to Jon. And you, he said, voice softer. You tell me exactly what you saw. Jon swallowed. His mind flashed back to blue eyes and shattered steel. I saw the enemy, he said. Not wildlings, not raiders, something that doesn't feel. Jor's gaze held his. Did it bleed? No, Jon admitted. It didn't even... He stopped, because he didn't know how to say it. It didn't even see me as a threat. Jor nodded once, slow. Then we become one, he said, and there was grim resolve in it. Or we become dead. Aemon's voice came, barely more than breath. The realm will not listen, he said. Not until the dead knock on their own doors. Jor's jaw tightened. Then we make them hear, he said. Outside, the wind rose, and with it came that deep vibration again, faint but steady, like a distant drumbeat. Jon felt it in his bones. Somewhere beyond the wall, something was marching. King's Landing wore winter like an inconvenience. The sky over the city was the color of old bruises, and a cold rain slicked the stones, turning alleys into rivers of filth. The small folk huddled under eaves and cursed the season, and inside the Red Keep, men and women wrapped themselves in silk and pretended the world beyond the walls did not exist. In the small council chamber, the fire burned bright, but it could not chase the damp from the air. The scent of wet wool mingled with wine and perfume. Cersei sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, a goblet of wine untouched before her. Her green eyes moved over the faces gathered. Varys with his soft hands folded, Pycelle blinking as if half asleep, Petyr smiling like a knife, and Tyrion slouched in his chair with a cup already half empty. A raven scroll lay on the table between them, sealed in black wax. It looked out of place among the gold and crimson, like a smear of soot on fine cloth. Pycelle cleared his throat. A message from the wall, he said, voice quavering. From the Night's Watch. Cersei's mouth twitched. The Watch, she echoed. How quaint. I didn't know they still remembered we existed. Tyrion's eyes flicked to the seal. Perhaps they're writing to thank us for our generosity, he said dryly. I'm sure the crown's coffers overflow with spare coin for black cloaks and frozen rocks. Petyr chuckled. If they're asking for gold, we can always send them a book of prayers, he said. They can eat those. Varys' smile was small and practiced. Sometimes prayers are all a man has, he murmured. Cersei tapped the table with a fingernail. Read it, she said, bored already. Pycelle fumbled with the seal, breaking it with careful hands. He unfolded the parchment and squinted at the ink. His lips moved as he read. As the words spilled into the chamber, 3 blasts, the dead walking, the wall cracking. Pycelle's voice faltered, as if his throat had forgotten how to make sense of such things. Cersei's expression didn't change. When Pycelle finished, the room was quiet for a heartbeat. Then Petyr laughed. "The dead," Petyr said, amused. "How innovative. I suppose next they'll tell us the wall itself has grown legs and is coming south to complain about the weather." Katabi. Tyrion swirled his wine, eyes narrowed. He didn't laugh. "The Watch doesn't waste parchment on jests," he said. Cersei took a sip of wine, slow. "The Watch wastes their lives on snow," she said. "They see shadows and call them monsters. I've no time for their tales." Varys' fingers steepled. "Tales have a way of becoming truths," he said softly. "When enough people believe them." Cersei's gaze snapped to him. "Do you believe it?" she asked, and the words were sharp, a test. Varys held her gaze with practiced calm. "I believe," he said carefully, "that the North is cold, hungry, and full of men who would happily trade their fear for our gold. If the Watch claims the wall is failing, it may be because they wish to remind the realm of their importance." Petyr nodded as if pleased. "A convenient panic," he said. "Send them grain, send them coin, and perhaps they'll stop sending ravens." Tyrion set his cup down. "Or perhaps," he said, voice quiet, "they're telling us something real." Cersei's smile was thin. "Real?" she echoed. "My lord brother, do you truly think Ice Demons are marching on the capital while we contend with real enemies? With Stannis sharpening his knives on Dragonstone? With Robb Stark tearing through the Riverlands like a wolf? With the Tyrells sniffing for advantage?" Tyrion's eyes held hers. "I think we can manage more than one problem at a time," he said. Cersei leaned forward, eyes bright with contempt. "And I think fear is a weapon," she said. "The North is already in rebellion. If we send aid, we strengthen their hand. We validate their claims. We make their superstition our weakness." "Now," Pycelle fluttered a hand. "Your Grace, the Watch has served the realm for centuries of irrelevance," Cersei cut in. Varys' voice was gentle. "If it is superstition," he said, "it costs us little to humor them. If it is not..." Cersei's gaze hardened. "If it is not," she said, "then the gods are crueler than I imagined. But I will not be ruled by a raven's ink." Petyr plucked the parchment from the table and skimmed it as if it were a bawdy poem. "They ask for men," he said, smiling. "How charming. As if men grow on trees. Men die." Tyrion's eyes flicked to the window where rain traced slow lines down glass. He thought of cold, of stories he'd heard as a child, whispered by Septus who liked to frighten children into obedience. He'd laughed then too. He didn't laugh now. "What do we tell them?" Pycelle asked, voice small. Cersei leaned back, settling into certainty like a queen into a throne. "We tell them nothing," she said. "We have wars to win with living men. Let the Watch freeze in their black cloaks and fight their ghosts." Tyrion's jaw tightened. "And if their ghosts come south?" Cersei smiled at him, sweet as poison. "Then we will deal with them," she said. And the words were easy because she did not believe she would ever have to. Petyr's coin clicked between his fingers. Varys' eyes stayed soft and unreadable. The Raven scroll lay on the table, ink drying, warning ignored. Outside, winter rain fell on King's Landing, and in the far north, the wall lay broken under snow. The Gift had always been a place of thin lives. A strip of land south of the wall meant as a buffer and a promise, but in truth it was a lonely stretch of farms and abandoned holdfasts. Men lived there because they had nowhere else to go, because the soil was stubborn, and so were they. In winter, many left. In hard winters, some did not make it out. Now those who remained fled. A man pushed a cart along a narrow path cut through snow, shoulders hunched against wind. His beard was frosted. His hands were red and cracked around the cart's wooden handle. A woman walked beside him, a child bundled against her chest, the child's face hidden in fur. Two older boys trailed behind, eyes wide, cheeks hollow. They had been told the watch would protect them. Black cloaks had come days ago, shouting, burning their own dead, urging them south toward Winterfell or Wight Harbor. The man had argued he'd lived here all his life, but then he'd heard the horn. Not the watch's horn. Something deeper, something that made the snow vibrate. He'd packed what he could and left. A brother of the watch walked ahead, torch held high. His face was young, jaw still soft, but his eyes looked older than they should. Another brother brought up the rear, spear trembling in his hands. "Keep moving," the front brother urged. "Don't stop. Don't look back." The man wanted to ask why. He didn't, because the answer was already in the air, in the way the cold felt like a hand pressing on the back of his neck. They passed a stand of pines bent under snow, branches heavy and black. The path narrowed. The torchlight flickered, casting strange shadows. The woman's breath hitched. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The man listened. He heard only wind. Then, beneath it, a soft crunch, like footsteps on crusted snow. The rear brother turned, spear lifting. "Who's there?" he called, voice cracking. No answer. The torchlight flared as wind gusted. For a heartbeat, it illuminated something between the trees. A pale face, eyes open, mouth slack. The rear brother screamed. He thrust his spear, but the thing moved fast, faster than a dead body should. It slammed into him, knocking him into the snow. The spear went flying. The woman shrieked. The child began to wail. The man grabbed his hatchet from the cart and ran back, boots slipping. He saw the thing on the brother, saw it bite into the black cloak, teeth sinking into flesh as if hungry for warmth. The brother's hands flailed weakly. The man swung the hatchet. It sank into the thing's shoulder with a wet thud. The thing didn't cry out. It turned its head slowly toward the man, eyes wide and empty. The man froze. The thing's eyes were not empty. They were blue. A bright, cold blue that reflected the torchlight like ice reflecting moon. The man stumbled back, heart hammering. The thing rose from the brother's body, hatchet still lodged in its shoulder, and stepped toward him with the steady patience of something that did not tire. The front brother shoved the torch into the Wight's chest. Flame caught, and the thing recoiled, arms flailing. The smell of burning flesh hit like a slap. The woman gagged. More shapes emerged from the snowdrifts. Hands pushed up through Wight. Faces surfaced, pale, eyes blue. They rose like weeds after rain. The older boy screamed and ran. The man lunged after them, but the snow was deep, and panic made legs clumsy. One boy stumbled and fell. A Wight's hand closed around his ankle and yanked. The boy shrieked, clawing at snow. The man swung his hatchet again, ripping it free from the burning Wight's shoulder and bringing it down on the hand gripping his son. Bone cracked. The hand fell away, still twitching. The man hauled his boy up, nearly sobbing with relief, and shoved him forward. "Run!" he screamed. The woman clutched the child tighter, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Where?" she cried. "South," the front brother bellowed, voice raw. "Just south." They ran. The cart tipped. Supplies spilled into snow. The rear brother was gone, dragged under by hands that clawed like roots. The man didn't look back. He heard the wet crunch of footsteps behind him, heard the hiss of burning flesh, heard the woman's sobs and the child's wail blending into the wind. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs went numb, and still the cold pressed on his neck like a hand, urging him forward. Behind them, the dead followed, tireless, patient. Winter did not hurry. It did not need to. Bran dreamed of ice. In the dream, he was not in his chair. He was running. Snow flew beneath his feet in a blur. Pines whipped past. The air tasted sharp and clean. His lungs filled with cold that didn't hurt. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, and as he ran, he realized he was not a boy. He was a wolf. He felt the world through scent and sound, the musk of deer, the bitter resin of pine, the faint tang of smoke from distant hearths. But beneath it all was another scent, one that didn't belong. Cold so deep it had a smell, like iron left in snow, like stone that had never seen sun. He lifted his head and howled, and the sound rolled out across the forest, answered by other wolves, distant, mournful. Then the forest went quiet. In the dream, he stopped on a ridge and looked out. Below him, the world was white, but it was moving. A tide of bodies flowed through the trees, dark shapes against snow. They moved without sound, without breath. Blue eyes glinted between trunks like frost catching moonlight. And at the center of it all, on a slope of broken ice, stood a figure. Tall, pale, dull, still. It turned its head, and Bran felt its gaze lock onto him like a hook. Blue eyes filled his vision. Bran tried to run. His legs wouldn't move. The cold scent flooded his nose, choking. The figure raised a hand. The world froze. Bran woke with a gasp, sweat cold on his skin. For a heartbeat, he didn't know where he was. His chamber. Stone walls. The smell of smoke and wool. The sound of wind clawing at the window. His heart hammered like a trapped bird. A candle burned low on a table. Shadows flickered. Osha crouched by the hearth, eyes wide in the candlelight. She had been a prisoner once, a wildling caught in the woods near Winterfell, dragged in with her hands bound. Now she moved around the castle with a wary grace, half tamed, half feral. Bran had liked her from the first, because she looked at him like he was still a whole thing. "You saw it," Osha whispered. Bran's mouth was dry. "It was a dream," he said, but his voice shook. "It wasn't just a dream," Osha said, and there was fear in her, sharp and real. "You've got the sight." Luwin came in then, lantern in hand, his face lined with concern. "Bran?" he asked. "I heard you cry out." Bran swallowed hard. "I saw them," he said. "The dead, and the one who leads them." Luwin's brows drew together. "Nightmares," he said gently. "The mind knows," Osha snapped, and Luwin stiffened at her tone. "You Southron maesters, you think if you don't name it, it can't bite you. But it can. It will." Luwin's mouth tightened. "Mind your tongue," he said, though his voice lacked force. He looked at Bran, softening. "What did you see?" Bran closed his eyes, and the image flashed behind his lids. Blue eyes, unblinking. Broken ice. A sea of dead. He shuddered. "The wall," he whispered. "It's broken." Luwin's hand tightened on the lantern. "We received word," he admitted, and that alone made Bran's stomach drop. It wasn't just a dream, but visions. It was looking at me, Bran insisted, voice rising. "It knew I was there." Luwin opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was no place in his careful world for a boy saying such things and being right. Outside, a wolf howled, long and low. Then another answered. The sound made Bran's skin prickle. Osha leaned forward, voice dropping. "In my village," she said, "old men told of the long night. They said the dead came when folk were too busy fighting each other to mind the dark. They said the cold walked south like a king." Bran hugged his blanket tighter. "What do we do?" he asked, and he hated how small he sounded. Osha's eyes gleamed. "You run," she said, "or you fight with fire, or you pray to gods that never listened." Luwin's lantern light trembled. "This castle will not run," he said, more firmly than before. "Winterfell has stood for 8,000 years. Osha bared her teeth in something that wasn't quite a smile. 8,000 years don't mean much to something older," she said. Bran stared at the shadows on the wall, and for a heartbeat he imagined they weren't shadows at all. He imagined them moving, stretching, reaching like hands. He could still smell the cold from his dream, faint but real, seeping in through stone. In the darkness beneath Winterfell, deep in the crypts, stone kings sat with iron swords on their laps. And Bran suddenly wondered, with a chill that had nothing to do with winter, whether the swords were there to keep something in or to keep something out. Jor called Jon to his solar the next day, when the sky outside was a flat sheet of gray and the wind sounded like distant wolves. Jon entered with Ghost at his heel, the direwolf's paws silent on stone. The solar smelled of smoke and old leather. The fire burned brighter now than it had before, as if Jor had decided warmth was a weapon. Jor stood by the hearth, holding a sword wrapped in a worn cloth. Jon's eyes fixed on it, and his stomach tightened. He'd lost his blade on the broken ice. He'd lost something else too, something harder to name. Confidence, perhaps, or the comforting lie that steel and skill were enough. Jor didn't waste words. He unwrapped the cloth. The blade beneath was dark, almost black, with a subtle ripple that caught the firelight like water under moon. The hilt was silver, the pommel shaped like a bear's head, eyes set with tiny garnets that gleamed like embers. Jon's breath caught. He'd seen Valyrian steel once, in Winterfell's hall, hanging above Robb's head like a promise. This was different. This was alive. "Longclaw," Jor said, voice rough. "My family sword." Jon stared. "My lord," he began, but words failed him. Jor held it out. "You saved my life," he said simply. "And you faced what's coming. More than that, you did not break when your sword did." Jon's throat tightened. He reached out with his good hand, fingers hovering over the hilt as if afraid it would burn. "I can't," he said hoarsely. It was my son's once," Jor interrupted, and for a heartbeat Jon saw a shadow cross his face, a grief Jor kept buried deep. "He dishonored it. I will not." Jon's fingers closed around the hilt. The leather was worn smooth under his palm. The sword felt heavier than it looked, balanced, sure. He lifted it, and the blade caught the firelight, dark and deadly. Jor watched him, eyes steady. "Valyrian steel has killed things ordinary steel cannot," he said. "There are tales. Perhaps this will matter." Jon swallowed. The memory of his shattered blade flashed in his mind. "If it can kill them," he said quietly, "we need more." Jor's mouth twisted. "We have what we have," he said. "A few old swords in a few old houses. And too many fools who think they're invincible." "No." Eliezer stood in the doorway, arms crossed. His eyes were fixed on the blade with something like hunger. When he realized Jon had noticed him, his mouth curled. "A bastard with a lord's sword," he sneered. "The world truly is ending." Jor's gaze snapped to him. "Do you have something useful to say, Thorn?" Eliezer's lips pressed thin. "The men are restless," he said. "They've heard. They've seen the break in the wall. They whisper. They look at the gate like it might open on its own and swallow them." Jor's expression didn't soften. "Let them whisper," he said. "Keep them working." Eliezer's eyes flicked to Jon again. "Enan?" he asked, voice dripping contempt. "You plan to make him your hero?" Jor stepped forward, and suddenly the old bear looked every inch a lord. "I plan to make him useful," Jor said. "Same as I plan to make you useful. If you can't manage that, you can crawl into your bed and die quietly." Eliezer's face flushed, but he didn't argue. He turned sharply and left, boots striking stone like angry punctuation. Jon stood with Longclaw in his hand, feeling the weight of it settle into his arm. Ghost sat beside him, ears pricked, watching Jor as if measuring. Jor's voice dropped. "Listen to me, Jon," he said. "You saw one of them up close. What did you feel?" Jon hesitated, searching. "Cold," he said finally. "But more than cold. Like the world was smaller, Like everything living was just temporary. Jor nodded slowly. "That's what I feared," he said. He looked down at the fire, and for a moment his face was lit by orange glow, making him look carved from old wood. "I've been Lord Commander a long time. I've watched kings rise and fall. None of it mattered to the wall." "Nay, that's fine." He looked back at Jon. "This matters," he said. Jon's grip tightened on Longclaw. "Then we have to tell them," he said. "The lords, the kings." Jor's mouth twisted. "We are telling them," he said. "They are not listening." Jon felt anger flare, hot against the cold in his bones. "Then we make them," he said, and the fierceness in his own voice surprised him. Jor studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Maybe that's why the gods put you here," he said. "Not to be a lord's bastard, not to swing a sword at wildlings, but to be a hammer against a door no one wants to see." "No." Jon didn't know what to say to that. He looked down at Longclaw's dark blade, saw the firelight ripple across it like a living thing, and felt the weight of duty settle deeper. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere beyond the wall, something answered with a vibration Jon felt in his bones. The enemy was still moving. They went to the Nightfort because there were no good choices left. Castle Black was strong, but it was also a target, a symbol. The Shadow Tower had been a warning written in blood and broken ice. Jor refused to let the Watch be surprised again. The Nightfort squatted along the wall like an old scar. Its towers were crumbling. Its yard was half buried in snow. The place smelled of old stone and stale cold, as if the sun had forgotten it. Jon had heard the stories. Rats as big as dogs, ghosts of murdered brothers, the thing called the rat cook that waited in the dark. He'd always thought them tales. Now he wasn't sure there was any darkness left that didn't hold teeth. Jor led a small group there at dawn, leaving Bowen to hold Castle Black. Aemon insisted on coming, though men protested, though the cold gnawed at his old bones. "If I can still walk," Aemon had said, "I can still serve." Inside the Nightfort, torchlight wavered against walls damp with ice. The tunnel beneath the wall ran straight and narrow, stone archway slick with frost. Jon's breath came out in thick clouds. He held Longclaw close, the Valyrian steel dark as midnight, and tried not to listen to the whispers in his own mind. They found the black gate where the tunnel narrowed, an arch of weirwood carved into a face, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes dark and deep. In the torchlight, the eyes seemed almost red, as if reflecting fire. Jon stared at it, unsettled. "It's a tree," he murmured. "It is more than a tree," Aemon said quietly. He stepped closer. Blind face turned toward the carved wood as if he could feel it. "Old magic," he whispered. "Older than our vows." Jor's voice was low. "The stories say it opens only for a brother of the Watch." "And if the dead have brothers?" one of the men muttered, and Jon felt his stomach twist because the question was not as foolish as it should have been. Jor didn't answer. He gestured, and men began stacking timber and barrels near the tunnel mouth, building a barricade. They poured oil into the cracks, ready to light it if needed. Jon stood near the black gate with Ghost at his side, watching frost creep along stone like living veins. The cold here was different again, deeper, older, as if the Nightfort had been waiting for something, and now it sensed it approaching. Aemon's hand brushed the weirwood face. "There was a time," he said softly, "when the wall was young, and men still remembered why it was built. They carved this gate so the Watch could pass, so they could go north and return, so they could stand between." Jorah's jaw tightened. "And now the thing we stood against has found a way through." Jon swallowed. "We can block this," he said, gesturing to the barricade. "We can burn anything that tries to come through." Aemon's head tilted. "Can you burn cold?" he asked quietly. Jon didn't answer because the question was too big. Ghost growled low, staring into the tunnel's darkness as if he saw something. Jon's skin prickled. He tightened his grip on Longclaw. Jor noticed. "What is it?" he asked. Ghost's ears flattened. The direwolf's growl deepened. Jon strained to hear. At first, there was only the drip of melted ice, the faint crackle of torch. Then far down the tunnel beneath stone and snow, he heard it. A low vibration, a steady pulse, like a drumbeat under the world. Men around him went still. Someone whispered a prayer. Jor's face hardened. "Back," he ordered. "Everyone back. Light the torches. Be ready." They retreated from the tunnel mouth, forming a line with fire in their hands. Torchlight flickered across the weirwood face, making it seem to grin. Jon's heart hammered. He looked at the black gate and imagined it opening. Imagined dead hands reaching through. Imagined blue eyes in the dark. The vibration grew slightly stronger, then faded, as if whatever made it had moved elsewhere. Jor exhaled slowly. "They're testing," he said, voice grim. "Like wolves at a fence." Jon thought of the pale figure on the broken ice, of the way it had looked at him like a thing weighing meat. "Testing." Jor looked at him. "We are not ready," he said softly. And for a heartbeat, Jon heard despair under the command. "But we will be." He turned away, cloak swirling, and the torchlight followed, leaving the black gate in shadow again. Jon lingered a moment longer, staring at the weirwood face. In the dim, its mouth seemed open wider than before. Or perhaps that was only his fear. Daenerys did not die with the first collapse. Winter was not merciful enough to take him quickly. They had carried him east after the battle, half-conscious, his blood freezing in his bandages, his mind slipping in and out like a man drowning. When he woke to stone and screams. The shadow tower was falling. Jor's reinforcements had bought them a day, perhaps two. They burned Wight's until the yard was a charnel pit of ash. They'd held the gate with spears and fire, and when men fell, they burned them too, because the only mercy left was to deny the enemy more bodies. But Winter did not need mercy. It needed only time. Daenerys dragged himself up the tower's stairs, leaning on the wall, every step a knife in his side. He could hear fighting below, the wet crunch of dead feet, the shouts of living men growing thinner. He reached the wall walk and saw the gap again, saw the broken ice slope slick with blood and ash. The storm had eased, leaving the world in a strange, pale stillness. Snow drifted lazily, as if unaware of the slaughter beneath it. Wights climbed. They poured through the break in the wall in numbers that made Daenerys' mind recoil. Dead men, dead wildlings, dead beasts. He saw the shape of a bear with blue eyes, its fur rimed with frost, lurching up the slope with slow inevitability. He saw a giant's corpse, skin gray, eyes burning, dragging itself forward with hands like tree trunks. Torches flared along the wall walk. Men threw oil. Flames caught, and for a heartbeat the dead burned and fell. Then the cold pushed back. Flames guttered. The wind shifted, carrying a smell like old snow and iron. Daenerys turned his head, and his blood went cold again, deeper than his wounds. The pale figure was there, walking up the broken slope as if it were a palace stair. It moved without hurry, without strain, the storm bending around it. Its eyes were bright blue, and they did not blink. Its armor gleamed faintly, and the air around it sparkled with frost. Daenerys' hands shook on the parapet. "You," he whispered, voice lost in wind. He couldn't hear his own words. He didn't think it mattered whether the thing heard. It had come. That was the only truth. A brother nearby loosed an arrow. It struck the figure's chest and shattered, splinters scattering like dead leaves. The figure did not react. It lifted its hand. Daenerys felt the wall tremble beneath his boots. Not a crack this time. A shudder, as if the ice itself recognized a master. The torches along the wall walk dimmed, flames paling at their cores, turning briefly blue. Men cried out in fear. Some stumbled back. The figure lowered its hand. The white surged faster, climbing as if pulled by invisible strings. Daenerys looked along the wall walk and saw his brothers, Black cloaks, grim faces, men who'd sworn to hold against every horror the world could make. They fought with fire and steel and desperation, and still the dead came. Daenerys' mind flashed, unbidden, to the raven he'd sent. To Jor's letter. To Winterfell and King's Landing and all the warm halls where lords argued over crowns and insults while the wall broke. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to weep. A Wight reached the top of the slope and pulled itself onto the wall walk. Daenerys stabbed at it with a spear, driving the point into its ribs. It barely slowed. Its hands closed around the spear shaft and yanked. Daenerys stumbled forward. Pain flared in his side. The Wight lunged, teeth snapping. Daenerys dropped the spear and grabbed a torch from the parapet. He slammed it into the Wight's face. Flame caught. The Wight hissed, flailing, and Daenerys shoved it back over the edge. It fell, burning, into the mass below. More came. Always more. Daenerys' arms shook. His breath came ragged. Blood seeped through his bandage and froze. The pale figure stepped onto the wall walk. Silence rippled outward. Unnatural. The Wights nearest it stilled as if waiting. Daenerys stared at it, and for a heartbeat he saw himself reflected in those blue eyes. A small, bleeding man on a crumbling wall, trying to hold back winter with a torch. The figure's gaze slid past him, not interested, not angry, not triumphant. It looked south. Daenerys understood then, with a clarity that made him dizzy, that the wall had not been their enemy's goal. It had been an obstacle, a door. Now the door was open. The figure lifted its hand again, and Daenerys felt cold rush through the tower like water through a broken dam. Behind him, somewhere within the shadow tower, a scream rose and cut off. Daenerys backed toward the stairs, stumbling. He wanted to live long enough to send one more raven, to scream one more warning into the world, but his legs were heavy, his breath thin. He turned and began to descend. Above him, on the wall walk, Winter stepped forward, calm as a king, and the dead followed. Raven that left the shadow tower did not fly clean. Its wings beat hard against wind that wanted to shove it back. Snow stuck to its feathers, melting and freezing again, making each stroke heavier. The message on its leg was short, ink scratched with a hand that had been shaking. Wall breached. Shadow tower falling. Send men, send fire. The raven carried the word south anyway, because that was what ravens did. They did not decide whether a message mattered. They only carried it until their wings failed. Below it, the north lay under snow like a beast under a blanket, breathing slow. Smoke rose from scattered chimneys. Black dots moved along roads, refugees, carts, lines of men trudging with bundles on their backs. The gift emptied. Villages went dark. At Winterfell, Bran sat by a window, watching snow fall and trying to ignore the ache in his legs that had no pain but all the memory of it. He held the earlier letter from the watch in his lap like a talisman. Osha hovered behind him, restless. Lewin moved through the chamber with a lantern, his careful face cracking under the strain of things he could not explain away. Bran felt the raven before he saw it, a flutter in his chest, a sudden tightness in his throat. He looked up as the blackbird circled the castle and swooped down toward the rookery. He didn't know what it carried yet, but he knew it was worse. In Robb's camp, far to the south, the king in the north sat alone by a fire that burned low. The war tent around him felt like a cage made of canvas and obligation. The letter from the wall lay in his hand, crumpled at the edges from being gripped too hard. Catelyn slept fitfully nearby, her face drawn even in rest. Robb stared into the flames and saw not fire but blue light on ice, a thing his mind tried to form into meaning and failed. He thought of Winterfell, of Bran, of the crypts, of the Northmen who'd followed him south because he'd promised vengeance. He wondered what vengeance meant against Winter. In King's Landing, Cersei stood by a window, watching rain streak down glass. The city below bustled, oblivious torchlight and market cries and the stink of life. She held a cup of wine, warm in her hands. When a servant announced another raven from the wall, Cersei didn't even turn. "Later," she said, and waved a hand as if shooing a fly. Tyrion, standing near the door, paused. His eyes narrowed. He said nothing, because he'd learned that arguing with his sister was like arguing with a storm. It only exhausted you before the lightning hit. Petyr smiled. Varys watched. Pycelle pretended not to tremble. The Raven's message sat on a table, unopened for hours while men discussed coin and marriages and the placement of guards. The realm's heart beat on, loud and blind, too busy with its own blood to hear the colder pulse rising in the north. Beyond the wall, the Nightfort's weirwood gate rested in shadow, the carved face unmoving. Along the broken western end, the dead poured through into a world they had not walked in thousands of years. Winter did not announce itself with banners. It came as it always had, quiet, patient, inevitable. The Raven flew on, wings heavy, carrying its warning over frozen rivers and white fields, over castles that still believed stone was safety, over men who still believed their wars were the only wars that mattered. In the far distance, behind the wall, a low vibration rolled through the land again, steady as a heartbeat. And somewhere in that sound was a promise the living had forgotten how to hear until it was too late. The long night was moving south.